What would you do if your own daughter looked you in the eye and told you to find a shelter? I was standing on her front porch in Franklin, Tennessee, wearing a coat I had bought 3 hours earlier from a Goodwill off Highway 96. It smelled like mothballs and someone else's life. My hands were shaking. Not from the cold, though the November wind cut straight through that thin fabric. They were shaking because of what I had just heard. There are programs for this kind of thing, Mom, Christine said. She did not step outside. She stood in her doorway with one hand pressed flat against the frame, her body forming a wall between me and the warm light behind her. Her hair was blown out. Her nails were fresh. Everything about her announced a life that ran on schedule. She looked past me toward the street, then over her shoulder into the house, and I recognized that look immediately. She was checking to see if anyone was watching. I told her I just needed one night. A couch. The garage floor. Anything. She folded her arms and lowered her voice the way she always did when she wanted a conversation to end. This is not a good time. I have book club tonight. You understand. I did not argue. I did not cry. I just stood there staring at the brass knocker on her front door, the one I had picked out for her when the house was new, and I waited for something inside me to collapse. The door closed slowly. The deadbolt turned. And I stood on that porch for a full 2 minutes after, listening to the sound of her heels clicking away across the tile inside. But that moment did not come out of nowhere. Let me take you back to where it all started. My name is Dolores Mitchell. Most people in Nashville knew me as Dee. For 31 years, I ran a property management company that handled commercial real estate across Middle Tennessee. I built it from a card table in my living room the year my husband, Carl, died of a heart attack at 52. Eli was 9. Christine was 16. Grant was 14. 3 children, a mortgage I could barely cover, and a business that existed only on paper. Everyone told me it would not last. Carl's former partners circled like vultures, offering to buy me out for a fraction of what it was worth. My sister-in-law said I should sell the house and move into something manageable. Even my own mother, God rest her, said maybe I should focus on the children and let the business go. I did not grieve the way anyone expected. I worked. I worked until my back locked up from sitting at that card table and my voice went hoarse from phone calls. I worked through school plays and soccer games I missed and parent-teacher conferences I was late to. I worked because 3 children were watching me and I needed them to believe that the ground beneath them was still solid, even when I could feel it crumbling under my own feet. For 3 decades, the company grew. Not flashy, not famous, but dependable. I solved problems other firms could not touch. I kept buildings leased and contracts intact when the market buckled. By the time I turned 60, I was financially secure in a way my younger self could never have imagined. Properties in 4 counties. A corner office downtown with a view of the Cumberland River. Accounts that my financial advisor called bulletproof. And every single dollar I earned, every long night and missed holiday, I told myself it was for my children. Christine, my oldest, settled in Franklin in a house behind a tall iron gate. She married a man named Derek who sold medical devices and talked about wine the way some men talk about football. She moved comfortably in circles where last names mattered more than character, where the right neighborhood and the right school district were worth more than kindness. Grant, my middle child, became a financial consultant in Brentwood. He wore fitted suits and spoke in a measured tone that made people trust him on instinct. He advised surgeons and executives, people who never asked about his mother, only his credentials and his quarterly returns. And then there was Eli. My youngest. Eli worked as a custodian at a middle school outside Murfreesboro. He married a woman named Marin who worked part-time as a home health aide. They lived in a small house with a patched roof and a yard he mowed himself every Saturday morning. The family never said it out loud, but I felt the quiet disappointment that surrounded Eli's choices. And I am ashamed to say that for years, some of that disappointment was mine. I paid for everything. Educations. Down payments. Emergency rescues when Christine's husband made a bad investment. A bridge loan when Grant's firm needed liquidity. I told myself that was love. If a problem appeared, I solved it with money. If someone struggled, I removed the struggle before they had to feel it. Over time, I became something I never intended. I became indispensable. And once that happened, they stopped seeing me as a person. I became a function. A safety net. A number to call when life got inconvenient. The realization came quietly. On an ordinary Tuesday, I received 2 phone calls within an hour. Christine needed $40,000 to renovate her kitchen before a charity gala she was hosting. She spoke quickly, efficiently, as though placing an order at a restaurant. Grant needed a short-term loan to cover a gap in his quarterly numbers. His tone was polite but detached, the same voice he used with clients. Neither of them asked how I was feeling. Neither of them paused long enough for me to answer even if they had. Later that evening, Eli called. He did not ask for anything. He asked if I had been sleeping okay. He told me about a student at school who had finally started eating lunch with the other kids after weeks of sitting alone in the hallway. He asked if I had tried the peach cobbler recipe he had sent me the week before. I sat in my office long after the Nashville skyline lit up outside my window, staring at a leather notebook I had kept in my desk drawer for years. Every financial transfer I had ever made to my children was recorded in that book. Dates. Amounts. Reasons. The numbers were staggering. But what unsettled me was not the money. It was the pattern. 2 children who reached for me when they needed something. One who reached for me because I was his mother. That night, something cracked open inside me. I saw a future where my health failed, where the money dried up, and where Christine and Grant stood at a distance, unsure what to do with a version of me that no longer wrote checks. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. If I showed up at their doors with nothing to offer, would they still let me in? So I made a decision that terrified me. I would disappear. Quietly. I would strip away the money, the status, the identity they relied on. I would show up as a burden instead of a provider. And I would find out, once and for all, who loved me and who loved what I gave them. I did not know it then, but what I was about to discover would be far worse than anything I had imagined. The only person I told was my attorney, Richard Poole. He was a quiet man who had handled my affairs for over a decade without ever asking a question that was not strictly necessary. When I sat across from him and explained what I intended to do, he studied my face for a long time before speaking. "You understand this could cause permanent damage," he said. "I understand it already has," I replied. Within 48 hours, I dismantled every visible marker of my life. I transferred all decision-making authority to Richard. I turned off my phone and locked it in my office desk. I packed a single bag with a change of clothes, a blanket, and a bottle of water. I walked into a Goodwill on Gallatin Pike and bought a wool coat 2 sizes too large. It was gray, pilled at the elbows, and missing a button near the collar. It was too thin for November. But it made me look like someone people would not bother to notice. And that was the point. The hardest part was leaving my apartment. I stood in the front hallway staring at framed photographs on the wall, pictures of birthdays and beach vacations and graduation days, clean surfaces, and the hum of a life that worked. I expected to feel fear. Instead, I felt something close to relief. For the first time in years, no one could reach me for anything. That first night, I slept in my car. I parked on a residential street near Centennial Park. The cold settled into my bones faster than I expected. I woke every hour, stiff and disoriented. At one point, a police cruiser slowed beside my car, its spotlight sweeping the passenger window, and then moved on. I sat up shaking, suddenly aware of how fragile I had become without status to shield me. The second day, I walked. I walked through neighborhoods I had driven past for decades without ever really seeing. People moved around me without acknowledgement. A woman at a crosswalk clutched her purse tighter when I stepped beside her. A man at a coffee shop avoided eye contact when I asked for a cup of water. I ate a sandwich standing up outside a gas station because sitting down on a bench felt like admitting defeat. That night, I stayed in a parking structure behind a church. Rain hammered the roof of my car. I wrapped myself in the blanket and watched headlights sweep across the concrete walls. At some point past midnight, a stranger approached my window. A woman, maybe 50, with tired eyes and a paper thermos. She tapped the glass gently. I rolled the window down an inch. She poured coffee into a foam cup and held it out to me without saying much. "You look like someone who used to have everything," she said after a moment. I asked her what she meant. "People who choose this kind of test usually forget something." She replied quietly. "The truth does not always come with repair. Sometimes it just comes with more questions." She studied my face for a second longer, then nodded and walked back into the rain. Her words stayed with me for the rest of the night. By the time the sky turned gray, I still had not slept. By the third day, my body hurt in places I did not know could ache. My hands were cracked from the cold. My reflection in a darkened storefront window startled me. I looked smaller. Older. Invisible. I nearly called Richard to end everything. Then I thought about the way Christine spoke when she needed money, efficient and detached, like placing an order. I thought about Grant calculating risk even in personal moments. And I thought about Eli asking if I had eaten dinner. I decided the order mattered. Christine first. Then Grant. Then Eli. You already know what happened at Christine's door. The coat. The porch. The book club. The deadbolt. But let me tell you what you did not hear. Before she closed that door, I reminded her of things I had never once used as leverage. The tuition I paid without blinking. The down payment on that very house. The nights I stayed awake when she was a teenager, waiting for her headlights to come down the driveway. The vacations I planned so she could rest. The safety I tried to build around her entire life. Her eyes hardened. "That was your choice, Mom," she said quietly. "You always did things your way. You cannot expect me to rearrange my life because something went wrong with yours." A mistake. That was what my desperation had become. An inconvenience in her schedule, wedged between book club and whatever she had planned for Wednesday. She shifted her weight and folded her arms, creating a physical barrier between us. I saw irritation flicker across her face, quickly masked by something that resembled concern. "There are shelters, organizations," she continued. "I can text you a number to call." I asked her one more time. "Just one night." She shook her head. "I am sorry, Mom. I really am. But this cannot become a situation." The door closed. The lock clicked. I stood there staring at the wood grain I had admired once when the house was new. Then I walked back down the stone path I had paid for years ago and sat in my car for 20 minutes without turning the engine on. I did not feel anger. I felt grief. Not for the comfort I had lost, but for the daughter I realized I no longer knew. Grant's house in Brentwood was nothing like Christine's. Where hers announced elegance and belonging, his projected distance and efficiency. Glass, steel, sharp lines. It looked less like a home and more like a trophy case meant to be admired from the outside. When I rang the bell, the door opened almost immediately. Grant stared at me the way he stared at spreadsheets that did not balance, squinting, calculating, trying to place me in a category that made sense. His eyes traveled over the coat, the shoes, my unwashed hair. "Mom," he said. "What happened to you?" For one brief moment, hope flared. His voice held surprise, maybe even concern. He stepped aside and waved me in, then shut the door behind me with a care that felt more like concealment than welcome. He did not invite me past the entryway. The house smelled like disinfectant and expensive cologne. Everything was immaculate. "Sit down," he said, gesturing toward a bench near the door. I sat. I told him the same story. The collapse. The losses. The nights without shelter. I kept my voice steady even when my hands shook. He listened with his arms crossed, his weight shifting from one foot to the other. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "This is complicated," he said. "I have clients. Partners. I cannot have this kind of situation become visible." Visible. The word hit me like a fist to the chest. I told him I just needed one night. He shook his head. "That is not realistic, Mom. People notice things. You understand how this could be misinterpreted." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. It was leather, monogrammed, the kind he carried because it made a statement even when closed. He counted out 5 20s carefully and held them toward me without stepping closer. "Take this. Go somewhere warm. Get cleaned up. Once you are in a better position, we can talk about options." I stared at the bills in his hand. I asked him if he remembered studying for his licensing exam at my kitchen table. If he remembered the nights I brought him dinner because he forgot to eat. If he remembered how scared he was of failing and how I told him we would figure it out together, no matter what. His jaw tightened. "That was different," he said. "I was building something. This feels like a step backward. A step backward. As if a mother in need were a line item to be written off." He placed his hand on my shoulder and guided me toward the door. The gesture was gentle. Almost rehearsed. "I have an early call tomorrow," he said. "Please understand." As he opened the door, I noticed his phone in his other hand. The camera lens was facing me. I did not think much of it then. I was too focused on the cold air rushing in, on the weight of the bills crumpled in my fist. The door closed behind me before I reached the end of the walkway. I folded the money and pushed it deep into my coat pocket. Not as help. As evidence. 2 doors closed. 1 remained. And I was no longer sure I could survive what waited behind it. I waited hours before driving to Eli's house. Not because I needed rest, but because fear had finally caught up with me. 2 doors had already closed. If the third one did too, I was not sure what part of me would survive that. Eli lived outside Murfreesboro in a neighborhood where the houses leaned slightly with age and the lawns were mowed by the people who lived in them, not by hired crews. I parked at the end of the street and walked the rest of the way, my breath shallow, my chest tight. His house was small. 1 story. Pale yellow siding that had seen better years. There was a porch light on. That single light almost made me turn around. Because it meant someone was waiting. And I was not ready to be seen. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately. "Mom." Eli's voice cracked on the word. He did not hesitate. He did not scan the street. He did not look me over and calculate what my appearance meant for his reputation. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me before I could say a single word. I felt his hands on my back, steady and warm, and something I had been holding inside for 3 days broke loose. Marin appeared behind him, already reaching for my arm. "Come in," she said softly. "You are freezing." The warmth hit me all at once. The smell of chili on the stove, clean laundry, something sweet baking in the oven. It smelled like safety. Eli guided me to the couch. Marin disappeared down the hall and came back with a quilt, then knelt to help me take off my shoes. I told them the story. The collapse. The lost business. The nights in my car. Eli's eyes filled with tears. He did not interrupt. Marin sat beside me with her hand resting lightly on my arm. When I finished, Eli stood up. "You are staying here," he said. "There is no discussion." "We do not have much," Marin added, meeting my eyes directly. "But we have enough." I protested. I said I could sleep on the floor. Marin shook her head. "You will take the bed. We will be fine out here." They moved with quiet purpose. Marin set water to boil. Eli brought out clean clothes, some of his, some of hers. Nothing matched. Nothing was expensive. Everything was offered without a moment of hesitation. After I showered and sat at their small kitchen table eating chili that tasted better than anything I could remember, they talked about their day. Students. A busted pipe Eli had fixed at the school that morning. A patient Marin had visited who was finally eating again on her own. They spoke to me like I belonged there, like I had always belonged there. Later that night, when they thought I was asleep, I heard them whispering in the kitchen. "We will figure it out," Eli said quietly. "I can stop putting money into the savings account. There will be penalties, but we can manage." Marin was quiet for a moment. "What about the roof?" she asked. "We have been saving for that since spring." Eli paused. "The roof can wait," he said. "She cannot." Marin was quiet again. Then she said something that broke me open completely. "Money recovers," she said. "People do not always get that chance. She is your mother, Eli. There is nothing to figure out." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall silently into the pillow. They slept on the floor that night. I lay awake in their bed, staring at a ceiling that had a water stain shaped like a half moon, overwhelmed by a truth I could no longer deny. Before I tell you what happened next, if you are new here, this channel collects real stories from online forums and Reddit and takes a close look at the psychology behind the people in them. If that is something that speaks to you, I would love for you to subscribe. Now, back to where we were. I woke before dawn. Marin was already awake, standing by the kitchen window holding a mug, watching the street like she was expecting something. When she turned, her expression was gentle but searching. "You did not sleep much," she said. "Neither did you," I replied. She nodded once, then asked a question that stopped me cold. "Can I ask you something honestly?" I told her yes. "You do not look like someone who lost everything overnight," she said carefully. "Your fear is real. Your exhaustion is real. But your story has gaps." My chest tightened. She did not sound accusing. She sounded like someone who paid close attention for a living. "The way you speak," she continued. "The way you carry yourself even when you're scared. I see these things every day in my work. People who have truly lost everything move differently. You are not reckless. You are not confused. You seem intentional." I asked her why she had not said anything the night before. "Because it did not matter," she said. "Whatever the truth is, you showed up needing help. That is all that mattered to us." Her words hit harder than any accusation could have. That was when my emergency phone buzzed in my bag. Only Richard had the number. When I answered, his voice was tight. "We have a situation, Dolores." He told me about the recording. Grant had not meant for it to spread, at least not publicly. He had taken a short video of me standing in his entryway, my face partially visible, my voice unmistakable, and posted it to a private professional networking forum. He framed it as seeking advice on how to handle a family member showing signs of cognitive decline. He used the word unstable. The discussion turned cruel within hours. Someone recognized me. Within a day, the clip had been shared dozens of times in local business circles. People speculated. Some mocked. Others questioned whether Dolores Mitchell was still competent enough to run her own company. My son had turned my desperation into content. He had used me as a prop to protect his own reputation. I felt the air leave my lungs. This was no longer a private test. It was becoming a public humiliation I had never planned for. "You need to decide how this ends," Richard said. "If you wait, the story gets written without you." I hung up and sat in silence until my hands stopped shaking. When Marin returned from her morning health aide shift, I told her everything. The test. The notebook. The real reason I had showed up at their door. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she did not look shocked. She looked sad. "He was protecting himself," she said about Grant. "That does not excuse it. But it explains it." She paused. You were testing love because you were afraid you would not find it. That fear does not make you cruel. It makes you human. Then she took a breath. But you cannot hide anymore, Dee. You have to face this. I nodded. She was right. The test had exposed more than I planned. It had revealed not just my children, but the way power distorts compassion when left unchecked. And now the truth had to come out before the lie consumed me. I called Richard back. It is time, I said. Bring everything. The notebook, the documents, all of it. But not to punish. To confront. As I ended the call, Marin placed her hand over mine. Whatever happens next, she said, you are not doing it alone. For the first time since this began, I believed it. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the real reckoning had only just begun. They arrived separately. Exactly as I expected. Christine's SUV turned onto the street first, too polished for the neighborhood, slowing as if unsure it belonged there. Grant followed minutes later in his sedan, parking a careful distance from the house. I watched from the window as they stepped out. Both dressed for control, not comfort. Christine adjusted her scarf. Grant checked his phone. Neither of them looked at the house with anything resembling warmth. They looked irritated. Suspicious. When Eli opened the door, Christine's first words were not hello. Why are we here? She asked. What is this about? Grant scanned the room. His eyes landed on Richard first, then on the leather notebook open on the kitchen table, then on the documents spread around it, then finally on me. His face tightened. Mom, he said carefully. What is going on? I did not invite them to sit. I stood in the middle of Eli's small kitchen wearing Marin's cardigan, my hair still unwashed, my hands steady in a way they had not been 4 days earlier. I knocked on both of your doors 4 nights ago, I said. I told you I had lost everything. I asked each of you for shelter. Christine opened her mouth immediately. I did not know how serious it was, she said quickly. You did not look like yourself. Anyone would have been cautious. Grant did not speak. His jaw was rigid. His eyes avoided mine. You knew it was me, I said to him directly. You just decided I was inconvenient. Richard stepped forward then, his voice calm and precise. For clarity, he said. Dolores Mitchell did not lose her business. Her assets were never at risk. This was a controlled absence. A test of response under perceived loss. Christine's face drained of color. A test, she repeated. You tested us? I tested whether you would see me as your mother without the protection of money, I said. Silence filled the room. Grant spoke next, his tone defensive and sharp. This is manipulative. You deliberately put us in an impossible position. No, I said. I put you in an honest one. Richard placed a tablet on the kitchen table and tapped the screen. The video played silently. A short clip. Me standing in Grant's entryway in the oversized coat, my hands trembling, his voice calm and distant in the background, the phone clearly visible in his hand. The angle made it obvious he had been recording. Christine turned toward him. You recorded her? Grant looked away. I needed documentation. In case the situation escalated. In case your mother became a liability, Marin said quietly from the doorway. That was the moment the room changed. Marin stepped forward. She was not angry. She was not loud. She was simply present, and her presence carried a weight that none of the expensive clothes or rehearsed composure in the room could match. I knew something was off when she arrived, Marin said. I suspected the truth before anyone told me. But we opened the door anyway. Because needing help should never require proof of worth. Christine stared at her, searching for words that would restore some balance, some control, some advantage. She found none. Eli spoke then, his voice shaking but steady. I spent years thinking I was the disappointment. The one who did not live up to the family standard. But when Mom showed up scared and cold, the only standard that mattered was whether we loved her enough to act. Christine's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared," she whispered. "I did not want people to see her like that. I did not know what to do." "You knew exactly what to do," I replied. "You chose not to do it. There is a difference. You were protecting your image, not your mother." The room was so quiet I could hear the kitchen clock ticking on the wall behind me. Grant had not moved. His arms were folded tight against his chest, his eyes fixed on a point on the floor. "And you," I said, turning to him. "You did not just turn me away. You recorded me. You posted it. You told strangers your mother was unstable. You made my pain into something you could manage from a distance, like a client who had become a problem." Grant's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in his adult life, I watched my son search for words and find nothing. Richard cleared his throat. Dolores initially intended to revise her estate documents today to remove Christine and Grant entirely. Christine gasped. Grant finally looked up, fear breaking through his composure for the first time since he had walked in. "But she has chosen a different course," Richard continued. "The inheritance is frozen. Conditional." "Conditional on what?" Grant asked. "Accountability," I said. "Therapy. Community service. Time. Real effort, not apologies spoken under threat of loss." Christine nodded frantically. "We will do it. All of it." I looked at her for a long moment. "Change is not proven in moments like this," I said quietly. "It is proven in the quiet months after, when no one is watching and no money is at stake." I turned to Eli and Marin. "What you gave me was not shelter," I said. "It was dignity. And that is something I intend to honor." Richard handed Eli a folder. Inside were documents outlining a new initiative, a community support program funded by my company, focused on transitional housing and counseling services for families in crisis. Eli and Marin were listed as co-directors. "Not money for comfort," I said. "Resources for purpose." Eli stared at the papers, overwhelmed. Marin's hand found his and held it. "You do not owe us this," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "That is exactly why I'm giving it." Christine and Grant stood frozen, watching as something shifted that no amount of money could immediately reclaim. The reckoning was not loud. It was final. The house felt different after they left. Not quieter. Lighter. Eli sat beside me on the couch, exhaustion finally visible in every part of his posture. Marin moved through the kitchen, drying dishes that did not need drying, giving everyone space to breathe. Outside, the street returned to its ordinary rhythm, completely unaware that something fundamental had broken open and reassembled itself inside those walls. I stayed one more night. Not because I needed shelter anymore, but because I needed to remember what it felt like to belong somewhere without conditions attached. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through thin curtains, I noticed my thrift store coat hanging on a hook by the front door. That coat. For days earlier, it had been a disguise. Now it was something else entirely. It was proof that when everything was stripped away, the only thing that remained was the truth about the people closest to me. I walked over and ran my hand along the sleeve. The fabric was rough. A button was still missing near the collar. It still smelled faintly of mothballs and someone else's story. And it was the most honest piece of clothing I had ever worn. I realized the test had never truly been about my children. It had been about me. About the values I rewarded. The silences I allowed. The way I confused generosity with love and comfort with closeness. Christine and Grant did not become who they were by accident. They became that way because I taught them, every single day for 30 years, that money fixed everything. That appearances mattered more than presence. That discomfort should always be avoided. They learned the lesson perfectly. And I had no one to blame for that but myself. People like Christine do not close doors because they are heartless. They close them because they learned long ago that love comes with conditions. That people are either useful or embarrassing. She was not born that way. She was shaped that way, slowly, over decades, by a mother who solved every problem with a checkbook instead of a conversation. And the hardest truth of this whole experience was understanding that I was the one holding the chisel. Grant was no different. He recorded his own mother not out of cruelty, but out of reflex. His entire world runs on image management and risk control. When I showed up broken and needing help, I did not register as his mother. I registered as a threat to his brand. That is not evil. It is something worse. It is emptiness wearing a very expensive suit. He had spent so many years learning how to manage people that he forgot how to love one. But Eli and Marin reminded me of something I had forgotten during all those years of writing checks and solving problems from a comfortable distance. The truest measure of a person is not what they do when the world is watching. It is what they do at 9 o'clock on a cold Tuesday night when a scared woman knocks on their door and they have absolutely nothing to gain by opening it. They did not open that door because they expected a reward. They opened it because closing it was never an option for them. I did not lose my family that week. I found it.
I found it in a small house with a patched roof and mismatched dishes, and a porch light that was always on. I went looking for answers wearing a coat that cost $4 from a Goodwill bin. What I discovered was worth more than everything I own. 6 months later, the community program opened its doors in Murfreesboro. Eli and Marin run it with the same quiet grace they showed me that November night. They help families in transition, people who have lost jobs or homes or both, people who need someone to open a door for them without asking for proof of worth first. It is the most important work I have ever funded, and it is the only investment I have made in 30 years that I know, with absolute certainty, will pay back more than I put in. Christine started therapy. She calls me once a week now. Sometimes the conversation is awkward and careful, and sometimes it surprises me with its honesty. She came to Eli's house for dinner last month. She brought dessert. It was store-bought and slightly crushed from the drive, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever given anyone. She hugged Marin at the door. She did not check to see if anyone was watching. Grant has not called. His inheritance remains frozen. Richard tells me Grant's attorney has reached out twice to discuss the conditions. Both times the questions were about timelines and requirements, not about me. I leave that door open, but I no longer stand behind it waiting. And that thrift store coat? It still hangs on the hook by Eli's front door. Marin offered to throw it out twice. Both times I told her to leave it, because every time I walk through that door and see it hanging there, I remember the night I stood on Christine's porch with nothing to offer and nowhere to go. And I remember which door opened and which ones closed. And I remember that family is not who needs you when you are strong. It is who stays when you are not. Thank you for listening to this story. Like all the stories on Revenge Stories, it was collected from a real online forum and reshaped for privacy to protect the people involved. If it moved you, I would love for you to subscribe. Your support means more than you know, and it encourages us to keep bringing stories like this one to life. If you enjoyed it, there are more stories on your screen right now waiting for you. We will see you in the next one. And if you have a moment, tell us in the comments, which door would you have opened